George Papandreou is the former Prime Minister of Greece. The scion of a premier socialist family, his father and grandfather were also Prime Minister before him. After years of study overseas, he returned to Greece to serve in the government and to help revitalize the economy of his motherland. What are his views of the recent history of his country? What led Greece to becoming mired in a debt crisis? And how is it managing as it strives to get back on track? To discuss these issues and more, we spoke to Mr. George Papandreou, former Prime Minister of Greece, during his attendance at the Imperial Springs International Forum in Guangzhou. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to Dialogue, Mr. Prime Minister. What do you think of the theme of global governance and China's perspectives? Does it mean China has the ambition to re-establish the world order economically, particularly through the ambitious blueprint of Mr. Xi Jinping on Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, thank you, Ray, for this opportunity to have a dialogue with you. I think the vision that has been developed by President Xi is a very ambitious and positive one about the world. Not to retract and leave from the globalizing world. We are now in a time when we are in a global world. We are in a global village. That cannot change. We are connected communication-wise. We are connected financially. We are connected economically.
But we've been pretty confined to the old world order, economic and political alike. Look at the Bretton Woods and the IMF, World Bank, Yalta framework with G7 instead of G20, still swaying, exerting much of the influence.
You are very right, and I think there is a need to look at both sides here. One is that the old world order, economic order if you like, has on the one hand been created and developed by the West, and therefore there is not the real voice of the new emerging powers in the economy in the world. So the weight of the Chinese voice is not there, and also of other emerging economies. On the other hand, China has benefited quite a lot from this world order with great capacity to be flexible and use the rules of the game in a positive way to see growth, to bring so many million people out of poverty, and to be one of the strongest now economies in the world. So I think what we need to see is, yes, change in these organizations to reflect the new realities, but to do so in a way which will also make sure that we do not completely disrupt the world, because there are a lot of forces that are saying, oh, we must just leave the globalization, we must just break everything up and go back to our little countries, to our nationalisms and so on. I think what President Xi is saying is not that. He's saying, no, we have to be engaged in globalization and make the necessary changes. Such, for example, there is what we see is in this world of this neoliberal philosophy that market rules everything, we see a lot of inequality. We see the growth, but we also see a lot of inequality. That has had a strong impact on our societies, and it also has impacted a large part of the populism and the reaction to a globalizing economy.
Yes, inequality is said to be the driving force behind the rise of populism and the campaign success of Donald Trump, which antagonizes not only the domestic establishment, but also threatens to alienate almost all of his allies, Europeans and Asians alike. So what do you think of the alleged and proposed leadership by China in re-globalizing the world economy? Do you think China is ready?
The question that you are putting is very important. Is China ready? And sometimes in political leadership, you don't always have the chance to say, to get ready. It comes to you. You have to be ready to, you have to say, this is what is my, I have to deal with. It could be a crisis, it could be a new role, it could be a new power.
It could be a Pearl Harbor attack that led to the U.S. involvement in the Second World War.
It could be some crisis that unluckily, so you have to deal with that in the leadership. So what China now is facing is a new role. It is in a new role. I'm glad to see that the President of China, President Xi, is saying we must step up to this new role. But it does not mean the same type of leadership, let's say, that the U.S. had in the past. I think we need to have much more multilateralism. We have much more cooperation. We need to have, we will have different powers, and there will be different great powers, if you like.
Perhaps the role China plays in setting up the AIIB could be a case in point in illustrating multilateralism and in benefiting from the governance of Europeans. So what do you think of the issue of rule-based governance? Because President Obama said famously, we should not let China write the rules. The United States should be the country that writes the rules.
I think we need to write the rules together. First of all, that the investment bank, the Asian Investment Bank, is a new positive development, and it also gives alternative ways to look at investment in areas which are underdeveloped or are developing. It also allows for a different way of looking at investment. We were talking about this here in the Imperial Springs, a very important idea that it is not simply to give aid from the rich to the poor. It is also to empower the poorer nations so they can take on their own fate. They can grow. They can be prosperous themselves, not always being dependent on others. And I think this philosophy is very important. The idea of a rule-based world is absolutely essential, because we are now in a planetary village. We are in one village, if you like, and if everybody does their being dependent on their power only, then we will have the rule of the jungle, and that will bring conflicts. If we can all agree on the basic rules, that means also that when there are problems, when there are conflicts, we solve them in a peaceful way. We solve them in a way which is mutually beneficial for all. And therefore, I think that this idea is a very, very positive one from President Xi.
Many argue that the growing economic interconnectivity between major economies will prevent them from going to war. However, there has long existed the issue of mistrust between the rising power and the existing power. The Thucydides trap is said to be a very dangerous game for major military powers over regional territorial issues. So what do you think of the solutions or political wisdom if we could exercise in shaping or navigating a course of sound and healthy development of such a multilateral relationship between major powers?
First of all, the fact that we do have the experience from ancient times, and Thucydides was one of the first, or maybe the first political scientist to talk about as Sparta saw the rise of the power of Athens, then they decided that this would have to be stopped. But we know that. We know that that can happen. So I think that when we know that, we do not have to repeat it. We can see that, yes, why not find a way for peaceful cooperation and coexistence. I would also say that there are regional issues, of course, but that also means that we need regional solutions. What Europe has shown in its recent history, and I say recent after the Second World War, is that we actually can work together for peace. Even though we had the worst war, we had Holocaust, we had in Greece we had millions of people starving and up in the mountains as guerrillas fighting the Nazis. We now can live together in peace with our difficulties, with our problems sometimes, different cultures and different languages and different ethnicities, but we have been able to show that at the regional level we do not need to go to war to solve our problems. That, I think, now is reflected and can be strengthened if we see the regional organizations strengthened also. For example, ASEAN and, of course, the African Union and the Organization of American States. These types of cooperations, I think, are very positive. I would add to that one important new development which is threatening humanity can also be a unifying point for humanity, and that is the issue of global warming, the climate change. The fact that all nations, at least when it was agreed upon in Paris 2 years ago, signed that agreement Today, basically all nations have signed it. Unluckily, the U.S. has said that they will retract their signature, but still there is a strong movement, even in the U.S. society, to maintain this global cooperation. That shows that we, in fact, as a human race, can work together as we're facing new threats.
China is still not trusted very much by Western democracies for the unique Chinese political institutions. We say we have to remain or stick to the principle of common with differentiation. What do you think of the Chinese advocacy? President Xi Jinping has not only established his own homegrown political authority, but also displayed the confidence of a national rejuvenation. But that issue itself has drawn a lot of criticism and skeptical observation.
Well, if we talk about democracy, both Aristotle and Plato said democracy has all the positive things. There are two issues that could undermine democracy, and one is demagoguery, maybe you can call it populism today, and the other is inequality. And we are seeing both in our societies and in developed societies. The sense of inequality is a sense of injustice, and if there's an injustice, you see society divided. And if society is divided, that also brings a leadership which is divided. And demagoguery is basically the kind of false promises that you create to instill either fear or false hopes, which then end up in frustration and in dead ends. So these are things, true things, which we are dealing with in our democracies. If you go back to ancient Greece, the idea of politics was basically the idea that we can change our own fate. We do not have to accept our fate as given by the gods or by a tyrant. That people themselves know how to deal with their own fate. And so democracy was an innovation. It was a way to say, okay, how do we make sure that we as a country, or we as a city, we as a people can decide on our own fate? But what is, I think, very important and very basic is that people feel included, that people feel they are not left out.
That's the essence of the Belt and Road Initiative, which aims to be inclusive.
So I see, so this is why I'm saying, if people feel, whether it is in China or whether it is in the global development, the Belt and Road Initiative, that they are being included, they are being talked to, they are also feel there's a sense of justice, there's a sense of hope. That, I think, is very important for our societies, and I think this is something which I understand that President Xi is promoting through his recent decisions in the 19th Congress of the Communist Party.
Thank you so much. When we come back, we'll take a second look at what Xi Jinping's thoughts actually mean for the new era of socialism with Chinese characteristics. But you are watching Dialogue with Mr. George Papandreou, former Prime Minister of Greece. We're discussing the issue of global governance and China's perspectives. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back, sir. I'd like to have an overseas observation from your perspective on the importance of Xi Jinping's thoughts, because everybody is looking at, trying to figure out what that means for sustaining the process of globalization. Itself is being questioned by the presidency of Donald Trump and his comrades in the team.
I believe that there's some very important phrases that President Xi has mentioned, has said, both in some of his international engagements, whether it's in Davos or in other parts of Asia, but also, of course, in the 19th Congress of the Communist Party. Shared destiny. Shared destiny, one, is very important. This is key to seeing that we, as a human race, have a shared destiny today. Despite our differences, despite the different cultures, we should use these differences as innovative ways to look at things from different points of view and maybe solve things, learn from each other to solve things. Another, I think, key phrase that President Xi is using is he's talking about globalization, but he's also saying that globalization has brought a lot of prosperity, and, for example, for China, a huge accomplishment of bringing so many people out of poverty and giving hope and in a prospect of a much better life. But at the same time, around the world, it has also created huge inequality. If you think that the top 1% of the richest in the world own more than 50% of the total wealth of the globe. So this is a huge inequality. So he has been talking about a just globalization, one that is more just. So he is shaping now a new global role for China, which has in all its elements a very positive view of how China would like to play this new role it is assuming. Positive, peaceful, cooperative, helping growth and helping justice.
Let me go back to what happened in your country. 6 years ago, you called for a referendum, casting a vote in the ballot box, deciding the future of your economy, namely the issue of economic assistance package from the European Union. Very few days later, the decision was cancelled, and very quickly your leadership came to an end. This was a major event, fueling public speculations about what's wrong with the leadership, political leadership in a democracy, because you are so democratic. You called for a referendum. What do you think of the issue of a majority tyranny? It is always the case that truth lies in the hands of a minority, a handful of people, instead of a majority of the population. So what do you think of the contradiction here?
First of all, let's talk about the particular referendum that I called for. I needed a wider consensus to push a program which is very difficult. We must not forget that this was a huge sacrifices by the Greek people. We lost about 25% of GDP, and the decision was
because of the fiscal austerity.
Because of the fiscal austerity, but at the same time we did so to remain within the common currency of the euro. So, in a sense, we had the dilemma: do we stay inside the euro, but also take the consequences of the adjustment program, or do we leave the euro and not take the consequences of the adjustment program, but maybe much more dire consequences, according to me, much more difficult ones, and so on. So this was a very difficult issue. I had a lot of opposition from this decision, and therefore I said that the Greek people should make a decision. Actually, I should have continued with the referendum, but according to the parliament, I did not have the, not necessarily votes that I had inside the parliament. However, the leadership I wanted was not, I would not call it weak. It was a decision to say, in order to make sure that this program will continue, I will bring in the other parties. If you don't want a referendum, okay, I will bring the other parties in to government. So what we did is we created a wider coalition, and I said, in order to make sure that this coalition goes well, I will show you that I do not care about my position, but I do care that we continue the program. If you agree with the program, I will step down, but the program will continue. And that's what happened. So I think sometimes when we talk about leadership and strength, it is not necessarily just to push through, but it is be able to create the wider consensus in society to adopt even difficult decisions. Now that can be done in different ways. Sometimes it can be done through the ballot box. Sometimes it can be done through continual deliberation and consultation. And I know that is the way that the Chinese are doing much more, through consultation and deliberation. But let me also add one more thing. I very much agree. We can also have the tyranny of a majority. And that's why in democratic states we say even the minority should have a voice. So you cannot have referenda which will create problems for the minority. For example, Catalonia, for example, yes.
Scotland, Brexit.
When we're not even sure if it is a minority in Catalonia. It could be a majority that do not want to leave Spain. It's possible because the way the selection was conducted, this referendum was conducted, did not really have the participation of the whole of Catalonia. So we are not even sure about that. But it can be quite divisive if a majority imposes, even if it's a majority, imposes on a minority that does not want that decision. and particularly on issues that are basic, very basic. I mean, if it's something like, do we want to increase taxes or not, that's something which is not exactly, if you're in Sweden, for example, they had a referendum on whether they should have the pension age go higher or lower or so on. These are issues which are not life-threatening or not changing your basic values. But other issues can be very, very important if you decide to target a minority. So this is why I think we need to have certain constitutions, certain rules, which protect even the individual, or let's say, if you like, a minority inside our societies.
Let's look at a comparison between the Chinese way of thinking, their lifestyle, and yours. I went to your country twice, and I found out that the middle class in your country not only enjoy benefits of democracy, but they have been seduced somehow by the welfare policy, social spending, socialist spending, or socialist ideology. In sharp contrast, the Chinese work very hard. Entrepreneurship is very tough, and we follow the central authority, central planning. Policy execution has been pretty consistent with one 5-year plan after another, despite the power transfer. So, what do you think of, the cultural elements, and what does it take to have a healthy civil society, so that you not only enjoy the sound economic development, but you also have a highly efficient economy and a very effective execution of the policy?
First of all, I need to make a clear statement that Greeks work hard. It's not true that Greeks do not work hard. If you look at the OECD statistics, not Greek statistics, but OECD statistics, we are the hardest working, most hours in any European country than anyone else. And all OECD countries, I think we are number 3 after Korea and Chile. Greece comes number 3. So we are a hard-working people. That was not the problem. It's not the hard work. It was governance issues. And we talk about democracy in Greece, but democracy is very young in Greece. It's not so old. We have an ancient tradition, but we have been a country in the last century which was occupied, we had a civil war, we'd have wars with our neighbors, we had a dictatorship. I lived under dictatorship. My father and my grandfather were jailed. We were exiled. So people were quite mistrusting of a governance system which was not part of really, they did not feel that they owned this system, that there was something imposed on them. And I think what China has accomplished, and whether you want to say whether it's democracy or not, but what is accomplished is to develop the trust of the citizens, that people know that there's a meritocracy, people know there will be deliberation, people feel that the leadership in general will try to do the best. There will be problems, and I know President Xi, for example, is saying we must fight corruption. We had the same problem in Greece. I said that too, we must fight corruption. But we had a system which was quite mistrustful. So when I came back, I said, we have to bring trust. How do you bring trust? Bring people in. Give them the voice. That's when I thought about a referendum. Bring transparency. I put all the expenditures of the government, every single expenditure, the smallest, from local government to central government, on the internet. I said, very simply, no law, no expenditure is legal unless it is on the internet.
The last issue is about the family dynasty. You are the 3rd prime minister of a very famous political family. Your grandfather, your father were prime ministers. Do you expect your son to be the next prime minister? What do you think of political participation by family members?
I think that in a society which is meritocratic, in a society which is open and the people decide who the leaders they want, everybody is equal. Sometimes when I hear the word dynasty, it has the connotation that I have taken this as a right. But I want to say that my grandfather was jailed 6 times in his life and exiled.
Unbelievable. This is unbelievable.
Because he was fighting for freedom of Greece. He was head of the government of exile during the Nazi occupation. My father was exiled twice in his life. I was once with him as a young boy. I was 16 years old. I had a gun put to my head when the dictatorship took place. So it is not an easy path. We were fighting for our country. We're fighting for an anti-imperialist, if you like, or the independent Greece. And to fight for these values is not easy. Sometimes people trust when they know that you have a tradition of fighting for values. People then will trust that you will continue in fighting for these values. A name can give you a license to open a door, but then you have to prove yourself, and sometimes even more. I have never asked my children to have to follow the same. I want them to follow the values that are instilled in us, but whether they get into politics or not is a completely personal decision of theirs. And of course, that's what was my decision, also a personal decision. But of course, it is bringing these values, holding on to these values, is also a very big responsibility too, and I hope I have lived up to those values.
Moral fabrics of values and social political responsibilities. We highly appreciate the legacy of your family politics, and that is part of the democracy in Greece. Thank you so much for your insightful analysis.
Thank you very much.
I do appreciate it.
And I appreciate our cooperation between Greece and China.
I didn't have enough time to look at these lessons.